AMD's new generation of cards is really exciting, delivering huge feature updates like FSR 4 versus FSR 3.1, where you can see in this footage, I have a dedicated review on this you could check out, is a massive improvement over FSR 3.1, and previous generation cards like the 7900 XTX that we'll be looking at in this video don't support it due to not having the FP8 machine learning capabilities on the same level as the newer generation. Now, this is the 7900 XTX model that I'm testing in this video. This is the made by AMD reference design. So do keep in mind on my performance numbers that there are factory OC models and things like that of the 7900 XTX, which boost massively higher than the reference model. So if my numbers for the XTX are a few percent lower than what you're seeing on your card or in some other reviews, do keep that in mind. But to keep it fair, I also have the 9070 XT model that there is no AMD made by AMD reference model for this, but there is some cards that have a much higher power draw target compared to the reference targets. So this this ASRock, there we go, I can speak. ASRock Steel Legend card I have here is hitting the 304 watts that it's supposed to. I've left both at out of their box settings, all of that. But anyway, let's go ahead and start with some ray tracing benchmarks, because this is the place where, performance-wise, AMD has claimed the largest gains, and they have absolutely delivered. We're seeing the 9070 XT 18% faster than the 7900 XTX here, and hitting very usable frame rates, 71 versus 60, and this is at 4K, but using FSR 3 performance mode. And notice this is FSR 3. Many games do not yet support FSR 4. Games with FSR 3.1, many of them can now hit a driver toggle and just switch over to FSR 4 seamlessly. But I did ask AMD about this, and not every FSR 3.1 game is supported currently. It's kind of a whitelisting process where I think AMD Labs make sure everything's good before they allow that feature through the driver. And Cyberpunk is unfortunately not FSR 3.1, it's FSR 3, and no word on if FSR 4 is incoming. Let's go ahead and take a look at 1440p RT Ultra at native 1440p resolution. And here we see the 9070 XT hitting 51 FPS, putting it 19% faster than the 7900 XTX from the previous generation. And again, remember that the 9070 XT has way fewer compute units, and despite it being the highest end card from their 9000 series, it's targeting a much lower price point than the 7900 XTX launched at. So it's really cool to see this win against a card that originally was, a beefier card with a higher price point. Anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at what if we kick on FSR 3 quality, since our frame rates were below 60 FPS even on the 9070 XT. Well, using FSR 3 quality, both GPUs are very playable here, but the 9070 XT is 20% faster at 89 FPS versus 74 on the XTX. Again, just kind of wish we had the FSR 4 here. I'm gonna go ahead and shrink out of the way because I don't know why I'm taking up so much screen space. So hi, I'll be down here. Anyway, let's go ahead and jump into a different RT game though. This is Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, and at 4K Supreme settings, the 7900 XTX is actually taking the lead by 11% at 71 versus 64, despite the fact this game always uses ray tracing. Now, this isn't the full RT mode, but it's the highest settings in the game without enabling some of the NVIDIA-sponsored path tracing update and all of that. At 1440p, the 7900 XTX is 13% faster at 118 versus 104, so they both do really well here. But what we can see is that the 9070 XT isn't just going to automatically win in every game that has ray tracing compared to the 7900 XTX. Depends on the implementation. Now in Silent Hill 2 though, if we go to 4K Epic settings with hardware RT enabled, and we do have to use FSR 3 performance mode to get around 60 FPS here, we see the 9070 XT take a 12% lead at 65 versus 58. Unfortunately, this is another game where there was no driver level FSR 4 toggle available at review date. Maybe these games will be updated by the time you're watching this, if you're watching in the future. Hi, if you're in the future, hopefully things are going well for you. And for me. Anyway, 1440p epic RT settings, no upscaling. The 9070 XT is 15% faster at 55 versus 48 FPS. 55 is fairly playable in a slow-paced game like this, but you still might want a bit more. So if we kick on FSR quality, again, FSR 3 quality on both, the 9070 XT is hitting 77, whereas the 7900 XTX is still very playable at 66 FPS. 17% lead for the 9070 XT. If we drop to 1440p epic settings, but no ray tracing, so we've turned off the hardware RT, the game still uses a lumen lighting system from UE5, which is kind of a software-based RT, but isn't relying on the RT hardware. We're now seeing the 7900 XTX take the lead by 3% at 68 versus 66, and a bigger lead in the 1% lows at 61 versus 56. At 4K epic settings, so this is native 4K, no upscaling, no hardware RT, but otherwise maxed out. We do see the 9070 XT 6% ahead, but that's literally 2 FPS, and it's 36 and 34. So realistically, these aren't realistic settings that you'd want to use to play this game. If we jump over to Horizon Forbidden West at 4K very high settings, which is the maximum settings available in the game, the GPUs are tied in the 1% lows, and we're only seeing a 1 FPS difference in the averages, so really that's margin of error. This is a tie. Technically 1% lead for the 7900 XTX. Now this is a game that features FSR 4, but first let's get a like-for-like comparison. So if we run both with FSR 3 quality, we actually see that 9070 XT jumps ahead by a couple FPS now. Again, there's always a tiny bit of run-to-run variance. We're talking very small differences here. 9070 XT is 3% ahead at 101 FPS versus 98. And what if we enable FSR 4 on the 9070 XT? Well, if we do that, now the 7900 XTX is ahead by 2 FPS, which is also about 2% at these frame rates. And so notice that with both on FSR 3, the 9070 XT had a bit of a lead. With FSR 4 versus FSR 3, the 7900 XTX has a bit of a lead. In other words, FSR 4 runs a bit slower than FSR 3. And that is consistent across my testing. So while it has much better image quality, so it's worth using, it is going to be a little bit of a performance loss compared to if you were using FSR 3 at the same internal resolution. You could probably get away with more aggressive settings, though, on FSR 4 versus sticking to probably quality settings on FSR 3. At 1440p very high, there's no need to use any upscaling as we're hitting 121 FPS versus 120, so again, they're basically tied. If we go to God of War Ragnarok at 4K Ultra native resolution, we're getting 69 nice versus 68, which is 1 FPS different, but a lot less nice. This 9070 XT technically ahead by about 2%. But once again, this is a very similar experience. I'd consider it a tie. Enabling FSR 3 quality on both, we'll also check out FSR 4 because it is available here. The 9070 XT actually takes a 5% lead now at 95 versus 90. And if we kick on FSR 4, now we notice the 7900 XTX takes a 1% lead, with the 9070 XT dropping from 95 FPS with FSR 3 quality to 89 FPS with FSR 4 quality. Notice again that it's still much better than the native resolution performance, and you could probably use a more aggressive setting. Sounds like my kids are getting home, so if you hear any stomps, that's what's going on. It's not a ghost in your attic or something. God of War Ragnarok, 1440p Ultra, 9070 XT, is taking a 6% lead at 106 versus 100, but again, both are getting a great experience. And again, 5 or 6% differentials aren't things you're going to really notice much in a blind test with no frame rate numbers being shown on the display. Ghost of Tsushima, 4K very high settings, puts the 7900 XTX ahead by 4%, 78 versus 75. Both are giving a great experience. Wouldn't really need to upscale here, but if you did, you would use FSR 3 quality as of the time of filming. This game has FSR 3.1 implemented, and that's what I'm using here, but it does not have the driver toggle available to do the FSR 4 override, so I'm guessing AMD will need to whitelist that one in a driver update or something like that once they've validated it. I think that's how the process is working based on my conversation with AMD. Anyway, 111 versus 110 means this is pretty much a tie. technically 1% lead for the 7900 XTX. If we drop down to 1440p very high settings, we see the 7900 XTX 2% ahead at 129 versus 126. If we jump into Hellblade 2's Senua's Saga at 4K maximum settings, the high settings are the maximum settings in this game. There's no ultra or epic or anything like that. We're getting, playable-ish frame rates in a game this slow-paced, because this is a very slow-paced game. But I probably still want higher frame rates. It's 46 versus 45. Again, 7900 XTX ahead, but not by an amount you would really notice. If we kick on FSR 3 quality, because once again, I did not see an FSR 4 override available in this game as of the time of filming, review date, day before launch. We're seeing the 9070 XT 3% ahead, which is only 2 FPS at 75 versus 73, but both are getting a very, very playable frame rate, especially for this style of game. If we drop down to 1440p high settings, we're now seeing, again, basically a tie, 78 versus 77. Good experience on both. 1% ahead for the 9070 XT. If we look at Call of Duty Black Ops 6 at 4K basic settings, do note this is basic settings, not max settings. So basically went really low because I think that's how a lot of people use more competitive games. You'll turn down settings both to get higher FPS, but also to declutter, sometimes it gets rid of foliage and things and stuff that gets in the way of sight lines and spotting enemies. So in a competitive game, I think running at lower settings is generally more common, so that's what I'm testing here. We see the 7900 XTX ahead by 3% at 154 versus 149. In 1440p basic settings, we see the 9070 XT take the lead by 1%, but again, it's 252 versus 250. You will not notice this difference if you're not running a frame rate counter. And if we switch over to Final Fantasy 16 at 4K Ultra settings, we see a 4% lead for the 7900 XTX at 50 versus 48. Both are a little lower than I would like for gameplay, so I think it would make sense to kick on at least quality level upscaling here. Once again, I did not see a driver toggle available as of the time of filming to do an FSR 4 override in this game. So FSR 3 quality on both, we're seeing the 7900 XTX 3% ahead at 74 versus 72. Good frame rates on both for this style of game, and again, you wouldn't really notice the difference between the two. 1440p Ultra, we're at 87 versus 84 FPS, 4% lead for the 7900 XTX. Again, pretty dang close performance. And that's the benchmarks that I ran on both of these cards. So let's pop out for a bit of analysis. So this is game by game, all of the various things that I tested. Now this type of bar chart usually needs a little bit of explaining for viewers, so bear with me here. So this is showing not frame rates, this is showing the percentage advantage for each GPU, and I have determined one of them to be in the positive direction and one of them to be in the negative direction, although I calculated both as the faster one divided by the slower one, so the calculation of percentages is done that same way for both. So the negative direction here, the way I've done this is a 7900 XTX advantage and by that percentage. On the right-hand side, the positive direction, again, the zero line is down the middle here. These are games where the 9070 XT had an advantage. And again, the number being listed here is the percentage advantage. If you want the actual frame rate numbers, that's what all those side-by-sides were for, and I do a lot of timestamps. So anyway, what we're seeing here is that there's a split. There's a lot of games where they trade off who's in the lead with a few more extreme examples. And you may notice that the more extreme examples, especially for the 9070 XT in the lead, are definitely the heavier ray tracing games, like Cyberpunk RT Ultra and Silent Hill 2 with the hardware ray tracing turned on. Now, overall, including all of these ray tracing results, it's about 30 results total, but there's a decent amount of ray tracing in here. I'm getting the 9070 XT about 2% faster using the geomean. However, keep in mind again that the amount of ray tracing, like if I had done mostly ray tracing games, that would probably go further in the 9070 XT's advantage, And if I had done mostly or even all no ray tracing games, you would see that advantage slip or disappear entirely. And as you can see that there's a lot of games that vary which one's faster game by game, even the game selection could very much have an impact on these results. So other reviewers testing different games may see this result swing a few percent in each direction. And again, remember, I'm using the made by AMD reference model 7900 XTX, and a lot of the third-party cards boost higher. So anyway, what we're seeing here is 2% faster total. If you'd rather see it split by best advantage for 9070 XT versus best advantage for the 7900 XTX, that's what the chart looks like. So again, different, but the thing is, the middle chunk of this chart shows that they're generally fairly comparable in performance, a difference that you wouldn't generally notice unless you're really turning on heavy ray tracing, where the 9070 XT kind of takes the advantage. Now, speaking of ray tracing, if we look at a chart of only ray traced results, this is what it looks like. And we can see that while the 7900 XTX did get a win in Indiana Jones, we see that in the heavier ray tracing results, it's a pretty big advantage for the 9070 XT. And the geomean of all these results is an 8% advantage for the 9070 XT. But keep in mind that in the heavier workloads, it's often more like a double-digit percentage lead. So the heavier the ray tracing workload, probably the bigger the advantage for the 9070 XT. Now, what if we just get rid of all of the ray tracing results? Well, then the chart looks like this. So this is using absolutely no ray tracing. And with this, you can see once again that it's fairly split game by game on where the advantages are. But do you notice that the scale of the graph is very different here? The biggest number here is 6% advantage for the 9070 XT. And the biggest number over here I'm seeing is a 4% advantage for the 7900 XTX. In other words, all of these results are so close that you would struggle to know which GPU you were using if you didn't have a frame rate counter running. So do keep that in mind. Anyway, now I did look at some other places and noticed that this is averaging out to basically a tie. I'm seeing my 9070 XT literally 0% faster. If I went down to the decimal points, it's a tiny advantage for the 7900 XTX, but a less than 1% advantage. So this is mostly a tie. Now, does this line up with what other reviewers are getting? Well, it does depend on the review outlet you look at, and I always recommend checking in with other reviewers. I'll just pull up one example here. This is Tech Power Up, and depending on what resolution you split by, they see the 7900 XTX either 2% faster, 3% faster, or looks like 5% faster based on the resolution. So their results, again, are all in that like 5% or less advantage one way, so they're kind of within that plus or minus 5%. So in general, there's a lot of evidence here that these cards are very comparable, but when you look at the upscaling feature set, where we see that the FSR 3 versus FSR 4 difference is pretty massive. I mean, look at these trees and things like that. This is a pretty big deal. So if you had to ask me, like, you can buy either one of these cards at the same price, I would take the 9070 XT because overall performance is similar, better ray tracing, much better upscaling in the games that support it, and that game list will probably grow. I mean, just look at the fence in the background over there, guys. Pretty huge difference in the upscaling. Now, I will mention that the 7900 XTX does have more VRAM. So if you're doing something that's super VRAM heavy, the 24 gigabytes of VRAM might be worth it to you over the 9070 XT's 16 gigabytes of VRAM. So there is that. But really, I think what we're seeing in this video is that I don't think anybody with a 7900 XTX should upgrade to a 9070 XT because it's really more of a side grade with similar overall performance, maybe a bit slower and rasterized, but pretty similar. And a bit of an upgrade in ray tracing and the better upscaler. So it's neat. Like I said, I'd probably choose the 9070 XT if they were both offered to me, but if I already had a 7900 XTX, I don't think I'd bother going out of my way trying to get a 9070 XT. I mean, it depends on what you could sell the 79 XTX for, I guess. Anyway, but that's where we're at here with this comparison. So if you're deciding which one to buy, I think the 9070 XT is better. I mean, look at what prices you're at, though, because it's not a lot better. But now, some people I've seen in the comments in some of these videos are asking, why did AMD even bother releasing a GPU that isn't really much better than their previous generation flagship? And I think they're completely missing the point here, because keep in mind, the 9070 XT is getting this level of performance with way fewer compute units and lower power consumption. So there was massive architectural changes here. And the fact that they're able to do that also means that this should be costing less to produce and therefore should cost less. And the MSRPs are certainly indicative of that. Although at the time of filming right now, I haven't seen what real world market pricing ends up looking like for the 9070 XT. But remember, the 7900 XTX launched at $1,000 MSRP and then came down, but was generally around $900. So the 9070 XT targeting a $599 MSRP, which we'll see how realistic that is, certainly I think this is exciting. For me, the biggest excitement comes from the upgrade to the upscaler, because I do use DLSS quite a bit when I'm playing, and my biggest issue when I play on my AMD GPUs on my 4K or 1440p displays, a lot of times I would have liked to have upscaled, but it's just too much distracting flicker and ghosting and things like that, like we're seeing there. And it looks like that problem is solved. So I think this is a really good showing for the 9070 XT, and a really exciting upgrade again for AMD. The biggest question left is, what does real world market pricing end up looking like? And we'll have to find out as things launch and then settle down. I hope all of you have an excellent day.